All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to call to order the council workshop on Monday, September 15th at 5 o'clock. Council, we have an agenda that's been circulated. Any errors or omissions from the agenda as presented? Hearing none. Moved by Councillor Forbes, second by Councillor Mock. Clerk call the question. All in favor? Contrary minded? Motion is carried. We have two, I guess I should probably do the minutes as well. So we have the meeting minutes that have been circulated with the package. Any errors or omissions from the meeting minutes as presented? Hearing none. Will somebody move the adoption? Moved by Councillor Forbes. That's the April 22nd and June 16th minutes. Is there a second for it? Second by Councillor Mock. Call the question. All in favor? Contrary mind? Motion is carried. Thank you very much. All right, tonight we have two discussion topics for the workshop. This is the Curbside Management Priority Paper and the Seasonal Readiness Update, followed by, then we're going to move into the council chambers for the special, and then we can come back here for the last piece of an in-camera discussion just quickly for us. And so at this point, I'm going to turn Curbside. Peter is going to start us off.
Yeah, thanks very little. Members of council, I'm just going to do some quick introductory comments before passing it to the team. Really what this first agenda item is about, it's really looking at our public space and the demands that we're talking about as it relates to transportation. So when we think about our high demand locations for transportation needs, there's generally kind of three areas. We could talk about our parks parking lots as an example. We could talk about recreation centres, as it relates to parquets, and then probably the focus of tonight's topic is on-street and curbside management. So really what we're obviously hearing a lot of frustrations, whether it's from members of council or the community, particularly in those high demand locations of trying to find parking, but also what opportunities are in the public realm, accessibility needs, safety reasons, and the list goes on as well. So really what the intention here is to broaden from just looking at car parking and thinking about curbside management as a strategy moving forward, and particularly again in those high demand areas. It's really important for us. We have a 2020 policy that does talk about parking specifically, and really what staff are wanting to do is to create a framework and a strategy moving forward. How do we take that policy that's already in place that does talk about things like pay parking and really implement that more systemically across our high demand locations? So I just wanted to start with kind of that as an introductory piece. There's no decisions that are required from council tonight other than staff are generally moving in the right direction and there's support to move forward with the framework. And with that, I'll hand over to EHAP to introduce our consultant.
Just before I hand it over to you, I should say we do have regrets from Councillor Back. He is stuck in Toronto, so we wish him well. And then we have Councillor Pope joining us virtually. Councillor Pope, can I just check on your audio? Are you able to hear us clearly? You are muted, but a thumbs up would be great. Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay.
Yeah.
Now over to you. Welcome.
Thank you. Hello, Mayor and Council, and for those listening online, this is EHAP Taha, the Transportation Manager at the District of North Vancouver. Earlier this year, staff presented to Council about initiating work on a strategic transportation plan and 4 priority papers, of which the focus today is the Curbside Management Priority Paper. When we say curbside, we are referring to the space between the curb and the travel lane, traditionally referred to as the parking lane. However, this area can be used for more than just unrestricted parking. It includes access, safety, visibility, time-limited parking, permit parking, pay parking, accessibility, loading, and waste collection, as well as beautification and shared mobility services. The need for curbside management is becoming more pronounced in our development growth centers, where we've seen higher density and increased commercial activity aligning with our OCP. More so, the curbside demand is expected to increase through provincially mandated housing directives like Bill 47, which among other things removes the municipality's authority to require minimum residential parking in new developments located within TOAs or transit-oriented areas. All in all, the curbside is an important, valuable, and limited asset where we would benefit from developing a strategy and framework for making curbside decisions. In helping to develop a curbside management priority paper, we've retained Mobility Foresight, a consulting firm that provides advisory services in developing resilient solutions for the mobility of people and goods in responding to emerging transportation issues. Mobility Foresight is led by my colleague here, Dale Bracewell, who is the founder, a mobility leader, and a transportation engineer with over 25 years experience in transportation planning and design. In addition to being the former manager of transportation planning of the City of Vancouver, Dale has done strategic planning work for the cities of Coquitlam, Richmond, and Surrey here locally, and Saanich, Kelowna, and Kamloops elsewhere in BC. We are very pleased to have him here today to present and share his wealth of experience in the field of curbside management. In terms of structure, we have a few slides for you today. It's going to be about a 10-minute presentation, followed by question and answer. Over to you, Dale.
Through the mayor, thank you, Peter, and greetings to the rest of council and staff. Excited to be here to touch on then the main elements that are in this curbside management priority paper, and look forward to, after the presentation, helping get into dialogue, answer any questions you have as you consider at least some next steps as it relates to curbside management in your growth centers, and as you have mentioned, as you're into the journey of completing your next strategic transportation plan. So as noted in the priority paper, you actually have a solid foundation in terms of parking policy. So the main idea of considering a curbside management strategy is, again, as per what he has said, you have a limited amount of curb space, and those demands are increasing. The list of things were already mentioned, but ultimately the district is about welcoming more people, and that's just going to add more high demand, and that's going to be most considered in the growth centers where you're welcoming even more people as you look forward. So you want to be, where you can, proactive about that limited curb space. And as it's mentioned in the paper a few times, evolving from, again, solid parking policy to be recognizing all the emerging mobility options that people want to take to meet all the mobility needs of the district. Next slide. So in the end, the strategy helps you then kind of guide decision making. Again, things like safety and accessibility kind of almost being like the prerequisites, things that you always want to be thinking of, but then moving in a strategic way towards equitable access for all modes. So that would be, yes, inclusive of vehicle parking, but it'd also be the kind of support that you're looking for the more multimodal, the more mode shift things that you have in your current strategic and your future strategic plan. The outcome that you would get with a more strategic approach is actually, starting with vehicle parking, you're going to get more availability as you make means to the policy tools that you already have. But what you're really doing is you're looking at every linear, every feet of curbside, every meter to make it more efficient. So ultimately, you're trying to optimize. It's a limited asset. You're trying to make the best public stewarding decisions of those curbsides. And I'll explain, kind of best practices, really give you the idea of in a strategic way towards a framework. The framework has got some sort of level of prioritization, and yet it's also trying to be contextual and adaptable to, especially for your growth needs. So again, transportation is, even at Capital Elementary School, when I do presentations for my kids, it's always about moving people, and it's about moving goods. And so you're welcoming the most amount of people in your growth centers, so you've got the most amount of people trips, I like to describe it that way. And of course, people sometimes have goods arrive in their communities as well. So that's kind of, we're focusing on the growth centers. That's the highest demand. Therefore, it's the highest demand off-street, but it's also the highest demand in terms of curbside activity. And your growth centers, your OCP, is really clear. It's residential, absolutely, but it's commercial. It's institutional. These are sometimes your resident destinations for the other things that they want to do other than live and work. And so a curbside management strategy is looking ahead at all of that, thinking of that mixed use and that combination of land uses, and even thinking of, again, goods, last mile deliveries that at least be more acute in growth centers than, let's say, a residential neighborhood. So it accounts for how you want to make growth. And then also to the extent that you're doing more community building and growth centers in terms of that public realm and that urban design. So to the extent that you're looking at more public space and activations or patios or even like green infrastructure, these sometimes also take the same places that parking would take. So that's why we want to look at it from a curbside management perspective. So the other aspect is that it's inclusive, like I said, of on-street parking needs. To be clear, the strategy then isn't replacing what you already have in your 2020 parking policy. It would be building upon it. So those already are your tools to kind of look at time limitations and eventually getting to paid parking. Again, why? For at least the vehicle parking that you want as part of a curbside management strategy, it's about increasing the turnover. But again, pricing in this case is about how to steward the curbside, how to make the most use of it as a public asset. So it's signaling, hey, there's a value here, and that's generally the best practice as you kind of graduate in terms through your parking policy. It's also when you have the residential and the commercial and institutional, there are employees. And so if you don't do the tools that you're already in your parking policy as part of a curbside management, you'll find people that will park there at the beginning of the day, have that stored all day, and then therefore it's not getting a lot of turnover and a lot of use for either residential, commercial, or mixed use, not serving the more people that you want to maximize in your curbside. And then actually, if you can just go back, sorry, the second part here is just recognizing just the timing here is that, as you know, the CNV is right now moving and graduating a little bit into paid parking. I just want to make the connection. That's in their high demand areas, and I think that's what I'm trying to make the connection to where this conversation is as a curbside relates to growth centers. So just in our minds, separate out kind of the single family, the residential zones of the city, and keep thinking on the growth centers. But ultimately then, as you walk through that spectrum towards paid parking, it's all about facilitating access to not just the residents there, but the community as a destination. Again, higher turnover, and looking at that equitable management of your limited curbside use. Thanks, Ian. And then just want to touch on that again, the parking priority paper, sorry, the curbside management priority paper is recognizing that when it comes to the off-street parking provision, the designation of the province, at least in one of your growth centers, is a TOA per Bill 47. So yes, you are no longer, as other municipalities, able to require what off-street parking you can expect. So developers are going to be determining what that is. Now, generally speaking, in terms of my understanding and working with development community, they want to provide what the market needs are, so we can expect that they're going to provide it. But we do think they're going to be recalibrating. There's been a historic over-provision of off-street parking, so we expect that to change. So that could exacerbate the kind of curbside use related to the TOA. So we're going to watch over time, but the way to be proactive and work against any possible concerns would to be moving in a strategic approach towards curbside management as these areas develop, and in particular the TOA. So what it is, I benchmarked best practices and just wanted to kind of summarize what would then the pathway forward be for developing a curbside management strategy. It typically involves number one, defining a curb space realm. I heard from your manager of transportation planning kind of a little bit about what that might be. You just also want to have conversations. Do you want it to include the buffer zone of the street trees and the benches, or do you want it to be specific to that kind of curb lane use? But what I would encourage you in that step one is make an attachment to your community goals. That's what's in your OCP and ultimately through your strategic transportation plan. And then in the case of growth centers, what are you specifically aspiring to in terms of the vibrancy in that mixed use community? Then you want to like categorize in language that works for you and your residents and businesses, kind of the main areas of functions. So I've got in the paper here, benchmarking other examples, access for people, commercial support, activation, and vehicle storage. So whatever the expression is of the functions that you feel are then important in the strategic way of curbside, and then you get to establishing a framework for what about those functions. So yes, some of them are real more clear prioritizations and hierarchies, but you don't necessarily need that. You just want to have an expression of how do you want to go about managing this in either a consistent way across growth centers or very specific to each of the areas of the district that it represents. Do you want, when you look at those functions, for every like curbside of every block side to have a mix of functions, or do you want to approach it as an entire block? Or do you want to approach it as a zone in terms of thinking about all those uses? So again, it's not then prescribing how you would want to do it, but you want to have a strategic way of approaching it such that you're thinking again about all the multimodal and vehicle parking needs that you would have in each of the areas. So once you kind of then are ready and you're moving towards the strategy, just want to give a lens of like, what would that look like in terms of implementation? So do you really want to press upon to help you in this, you need objective data and you want to be able having the ability to analyze it. So you'd want to start with even like how much data do we have even with the current type of parking and curbside regulations do we have? How is our enforcement going? Do we have enough context on that to understand where probably that change on the high demand is already needed? And of course, how do you monitor and adapt that over time? So have a monitoring plan, because again, the goal here is to have some sort of objectivity and metric around what we're saying is the optimization, the efficiency of the curbside, and then a way to actually reflect maybe residents' concerns and business concerns, and for you as decision makers to have some objective data and talk to staff about that as a curbside. And then just, not recognizing that you'd be on a journey, but just the hint towards as your resources permit and as the demands increase and you want to do more of the implementation and strategy, thinking of digitization and tools. There's a lot of technology now. There's cameras, there's sensors, there's automatic enforcement. So just, you don't have to start there, but you'd want to be more efficient and work towards that as your resources provide. So in conclusion, just to encourage you to think again beyond your already parking policy and your parking regulatory tools. Curbside management strategy, it really is a fun conversation to have here tonight. It's an emerging best practice in transportation and in particular relevant in like urban centers and New York context growth centers. It can be then a conversation you continue to have as you develop your strategic transportation plan. But I hope that you'd see in the curbside management priority paper, it's also going to give you a chance to continue conversations with staff to say, hey, here's a little bit of a playbook. Where do we maybe want to learn and adapt and consider some curbside management strategic ideas, even while you're creating your strategic transportation plan over the next 2 years? Again, why? To best manage the limited space that you have in curbside in at least some of your high demand areas in growth centers.
You have an interesting idea about what fun is.
I know. He's an engineer. Oh.
I was like, okay, that's a good way to lighten the mood after this, but yeah, I don't know how fun it is, but good one.
I've got Councillor Baum.
Thank you, Dale, or Mr. Bracewell. I had to look back at my notes from previous workshop, and to me, we're faced with many issues in the district, but to me, transportation is the top issue that we have. So the strategic plan that we're working on is needed, and I'm glad we're looking at these 4 priority papers. And without using cliche about keeping the big picture in mind, I think during the short term, before we get to our big plan, I hope that we look for practical and be practical and take advantage of some quick wins. And my comments, the report, I did read it. There's a lot of good stuff in there, and my comments aren't meant to be like throwing out the baby with the bathwater, but I offer some additional consideration. I noticed that paid parking is mentioned many times in the staff and consultants report. Are these curbside management practices that we're looking at a precursor to introducing paid parking? I just want to make sure that we're transparent with our residents. And maybe if I could just throw out my questions and if you can take them. We talk about the curbside management strategy, taking into account RPOs and managing areas around key areas. I wasn't sure if I saw in the report kind of like key areas where there's a lot of visitors. I think of specifically Deep Cove and living on the west side of the district. Traffic around Capilano Suspension Bridge is challenging at times, especially in this end of summer or summer and ski season. Like it's a tough place to navigate there. And I wasn't sure if there's parking lots nearby, how does that impact curbside management? Is it another asset to manage, or is this report really about curbside and not taking into account when there's a parking lot nearby? I just wasn't sure. And when I look at the background and context section of the report, I appreciate it. I appreciate the technical considerations. But this is similar to when we took an approach looking at Delbrook. We had our technical information, but there was also a component where we listened to the residents. And I'm wondering if going forward, if our curbside management strategy also has a mechanism to fine tune some of our policies, looking at specific local issues. And I'll be upfront, I met with some residents that are in Deep Cove on Rayburn. Quick story, there's the resident-only parking that ends at their section. So what they find is a lot of visitors coming here. And if you go beyond where the RPO is, it leads to 3 streets, but all those streets are dead ends. So we get a lot of cars turning around, and I've gone down there, and I think Councilor Murray has gone down there. You've seen all that. So I just would ask that when we develop this big strategy, have the big picture, we also look at maybe there's some specific instances where, hey, this is a special consideration. I know the report speaks a lot about parking. What I'm hearing from talking to people is traffic, because if there's a 4-hour limit, this is what I'm hearing from people. They find that vehicles are driving around circling until someone leaves. So it's not only parking, but are we looking at traffic flow? Like, we want to look at how we optimize parking, but also look at how we can influence that by traffic flow, and potentially one way. So I'm not sure, but like I said, I throw these out for consideration. I'm glad that the report also speaks about mobility issues. And once again, this is coming from a resident of Clarendon Heights. She has a son that has mobility issues, and she has a van to take him around. But her van is rear loading. So for her, it's great that there's accessible parking spots, but they're not quite long enough for her. And I don't know how we manage that, like to say, okay, you can only park here if you have a rear loading van or not. But, as I look forward, our population is aging. And, mobility will become more of a challenge. Do we, if the engineering stat says, 5% of our parking spots should be accessible, do we kind of look at that reflecting against our demographic and our needs to say, hey, maybe we should have 10%. I just put that out there. So, like I said, I appreciate the report. I also my final comment is, I like in the report that on page 7, it talks about continuous assessment and refinement, and that this isn't kind of like a static, and that it's dynamic. So I appreciate that we have this opportunity to kind of look at what's working and then maybe tweak it. So there's some questions in there. I'll leave it to you to bring those up.
A number of questions in there. I'm going to go to the consultant, then I have Mr. Stewart. I'm going to make some comments, and then Councilor Murray. So go ahead.
Sure, and you have to give anything. So pay parking precursor, I'll just say that, yeah, when you look at the best practices of a curbside management strategy for areas of a growth center, you are already and would definitely stay on the journey of eventually getting to pay parking. But your strategic approach to it, and if it includes, let's say, opportunities to engage the public and better understand each of the growth centers, there's no hint or suggestion of how soon you would want to do that. But I will be clear that when you look at curbside management strategies in the high demand areas, you eventually get to a point for the amount of vehicle parking and storage that you want to actually have that turnover, which supports residents, access, which supports business. You would eventually want to get there. I want to be clear, that is what is being referenced from a best practice in curbside management. As it relates to maybe referencing other parts of the district where there's like a high number of visitors, this is not addressing that. There are obviously some principles that I'm benchmarking in a curbside management strategy that your team has already been thinking of for Deep Cove or would, but it's not trying to, I guess, help guide your decision-making on a Capilano suspension bridge or Deep Cove. Again, this is more the mixed use, high-rise development, very institutional, commercial, residential areas. So that's any clarity. Parking lots nearby, absolutely. I didn't really emphasize that much, but I said a couple times in the paper, you do always want to acknowledge the ecosystem of parking. And that's where, again, I don't want to belabor price parking, but part of what pricing does the moment, at least you even make it like $1 an hour, it starts to signal that that's our price on that, and that if there was a lot nearby, it might be a further bit of a walk, but if that were, let's say, free as an example, then people start to think about their behavior different. But you do want to think it from an ecosystem perspective. Engagement, I'll defer to staff on that. But part of an implementation of a curbside management as it relates to traffic and circulation that's included in the strategy is, yes, again, it references that 85% occupancy because, again, you want to actually have a management of that curbside for the different loading, for the vehicle parking, for the bike parking that gives some opportunity for people to have the chance of actually being able to use that curbside. And that reduces circulation and reduces traffic. But there's no suggestions on where you do one-way streets, for example. But that is evidence from other people who have implemented curbside management. Accessible zones, again, the strategy would reference aging population. You're going to want more of these as referenced as you think, but that relates to your last point. Yes, it's an assessment and a refinement. You should be serving those that have the accessible needs now. I would expect that to grow here in the district over time, but that's the adaptability and the objectivity of measurement and enforcement, and then if there's a design comment, maybe on the length of the stalls, I defer to staff.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to go to Mr. Stewart.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is a never-ending problem like trees in North Vancouver or pets, whatever. But at the end of the day, it's a very political decision. I don't want to duck that. And that's the challenge that council has, because every action that you change, everything that you do that changes something in this municipality draws a response in some way, shape, or form. And whether that's paid parking or something else, we're going to have to move there at some point. So I'm just going to try to condense this into 3 different areas for you to consider, and you don't have to consider it tonight. But the fact of the matter is, there's street side parking, there's parks parking, and then there's community center parking. And all of those are very, very distinct treatments. And we're going to have to, in the next year, in my opinion, resolve all 3 from a social policy standpoint, or even a very practical standpoint in terms of what's going to work and what's going to not work. And I'll use it. I'm sorry, your mayor. I will use an example this morning where you said Delbrick parking, you might be able to charge underground, but you couldn't charge out on the street. Those are really practical points, but we have to make those decisions at some point as a council in the next year. Maybe it's the next 2 years because of the politics of re-elections and all the rest of it. But as a council, we need to make some really fundamental decisions around how we're going to approach parking in the municipality. And I don't see us anywhere near that. I see us rolling around, but we're going to have to come to some kind of conclusion. So I'm sorry, I'm being really honest there, but that's where I feel we're at. And it may not be comfortable for this election, but certainly if it's not dealt with in the near future, it's going to have to be dealt with in the further future, which is to say, how do we actually manage this for our municipality in the long term? So sorry, I wax a little more poetic than I usually do. So
Oh, that's fine, Mr. Stewart. Thank you very much for your comments. Mr. Taha, do you have any comments from staff about it? I think there was a couple of points directed to you about the engagement and such.
Yes, through the mayor. I think one of the key things I think I'd like to take away from today is the importance of making data-driven decision-making. So I think my colleague Dale definitely emphasized that it's paid parking is just one of the tools that could be used, right? It's all based on utilization. So for example, you might put in a 4-hour zone and you might observe continued issues. So you might monitor that zone, and if you reach 85% utilization, you might go to 2 hours. Still not working, you might consider paid parking. It's a bit of a stepped function, and it's not, by no means would we want to apply a blanket one-size-fits-all for every neighborhood, for every town center, but rather it's looking block by block and using data to make informed decisions. So that's kind of one of the key elements that Councillor Ma brought up about being a precursor. I think I would frame it as using data to make those decisions. I do emphasize the Deep Cove conversation, that the growth centers are very different, and the multifamily is very different than the single family. Some of the tools we use for multifamily might not really apply or might not be appropriate for single family neighborhoods. Because, you know, Deep Cove, you have a very different context where you have tourism versus people who live there day in and day out and have to deal with the operational challenges of that area. So that's very different than a Lynn Creek, for example, where it's a growing community, there's growing pains, there's high-rise buildings, mixed use, commercial, industrial, institutional, whatever it may be. Absolutely, engaging local context, dealing with it as a systems-based approach. So what I mean by that is it's not just parking, it's traffic management, it's traffic control, it's traffic safety. First and foremost, you might need to restrict parking for visibility, right? That comes in before parking utilization and paid parking and all of that. So I think treating it as a systems-based approach is really important. And then finally, with accessibility, I think part of the reason we're creating this framework is to give us some guidance, about what are the length of spaces, what are best practices, how do we deal with an aging population, how do we deal with changing property owners, right? You might have a property owner who lives in one area one time and then through the years may change over time. So I think it's definitely one of the key things that we'd like to take away from today is it's dynamic, it's changing, it's a little bit, and it's iterative. So we're constantly trying something. If it doesn't work, adapting and reiterating and just using best engineering practices based on data-driven decision-making.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you phrasing the way that it's going to be incremental. It's going to be steps. It's going to be revised over and over and over and over again. That I think makes sense. And so, you know, it's hard to move to a more advanced solution all at once and just say, this is what the future looks like, therefore we're just going to do it. It seems to me that there's nothing other than the desire to have the revenue center. We definitely can take a much more incremental approach to this if we don't have a higher value use for the particular land. My challenge is, I'm going to push back on one thing in the presentation. I don't think there's a lot of buildings that have overbuilt parking. I think that there's when I first came on council in 2005, we were at 1.8 stalls per unit. We dropped to 1.6, we dropped to 1.2, we dropped to unbundled. Like, the municipality was already very actively responding to changes in the marketplace, desire to have more less car-centric neighborhoods and come up with alternatives, car shares, transit, whatever the case may be. We were already heading that direction when the provincial government decided to remove the restrictions on it. My problem is I can't trust the development industry to build what's needed. They're there to build what they can sell. And so the problem is, I think there was a community member, Peter Keevan, did an FOI on a development, and I think it was one of the best FOIs I've actually seen in my time in politics, because what it did was it forced, it said it was on ICBC. We had a particular development that had been built, and the question was that people had suggested anecdotally that there were empty spaces in the parking garage. And so the FOI was to ICBC and said, how many vehicles are registered to that particular building? And ICBC didn't want to actually fulfill the FOI. I had to go back and forth with the commissioner until they finally came up with it. And it showed that the number of cars that were registered to the building far exceeded the number of cars that were actually in the parkade. And they were, if you went by that neighborhood at 2 a.m, you could see it. They were in every single nook and cranny throughout the entire neighborhood. You'd have to go 2 blocks away from that particular building and development in order to be able to find some space that you could stick a car. And so the developers weren't actually meeting the need of their projects. And the municipality was facilitating it to some degree because we had been told, there's empty parkades, you could go lower, there's empty parkades, you could go lower. And the reality was, as that neighborhood was in flux and there was still the traditional single-family street curbside space hidden throughout the general neighborhood, they were relying on that to make it look like it was functioning. And so we're about to really see it again. On Hunter Street, we're gonna have a 5-day closure of 40 parking stalls on Hunter Street, right next to the development that's just gone in there in Integral. And what you're gonna see is, instead of parking in the parkade where they have to pay a monthly rate, people have been parking throughout that entire end of the neighborhood. And we're about to see how frustrating it is for them to be able to find those additional 40 parking stalls and how far afield they're gonna have to go. The parking stalls now aren't available for a public purpose. So you've got a wonderful park right in the middle of that neighborhood. It's not just for that neighborhood, it's meant for a broader area to be able to come and go in that park. But you go there at 8 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday, it's packed. Because overnight, everybody just parked there because we don't police it over the course of the weekend. And so it's that snapshot in time problem where we can have a vision for what the community is going to look like when it's entirely built out and well, there's just going to be no curb space. The residential program is probably going to wind down because frankly, there won't be any single family left in that neighborhood anyway. It'll all be managed curb space. And I don't think that they're actually producing a high enough ratio of parking for today. Maybe some future generation when we get a higher level of transit service, maybe the ability to work from home will sort of balance out and across more generations, but I don't see us with the current round of development, some as low as like 0.5, 0.62. We don't have anything that's not producing any parking in it yet, but I just don't see it as being functional when you consider it amongst an actually built out neighborhood. They're going to be in big trouble. And I get the emails already from people who are frustrated with the Salal building down on Bond Street because less than half of the units actually got a parking stall. And they're trying to function in our economy. Well, that was cathartic. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to
It
just
feels better.
unload what's coming into my email box these days.
Take a breath now.
Can I maybe?
I really would appreciate it.
Just maybe then more specific to, again, it does speak to data decisions and objective data. So that was, I think, a clear example of where you have more information around a particular the ICBC context, and then what's coming up with Hunter. So I'll just use one as I was benchmarking and tying back to some colleagues at the City of Vancouver. The idea, though, that of doing some management of curbside. So, for example, in the Mount Pleasant Industrial, it's an area of transition where the city there wants to support employees, but felt like, well, they needed to start doing some paid parking to be consistent with, the Broadway and the subway, et cetera. They kind of overshot from like they put a high price and did some things, and then there were a lot of empty spaces. And then I think staff did a great job. They came back and said, let's have like I can't remember, sorry, what, $8 per day for people who would then, in the meter, park all day so that some of that employee parking that Mount Pleasant doesn't have as much off street. So I think the idea of dynamic and even helping you in kind of construction situations in the areas of transition in growth centers, at least as a connection back to the priority paper.
Thank you. Mr. Tyler.
Thank you, Mayor Litter. I would somewhat echo what you're saying. I think it's essential that part of the reason we're coming here today is because it's important that we make a statement to the development community that they cannot rely on curb space to service the demand from their residential new developments. That is absolutely imperative. So we might even want to put paid parking prior to occupancy, prior to anybody buying a unit. You might want to put paid parking and set the stage, set the public expectations that the development community cannot rely on the curb space. And that's why we're here today. I think that's a really critical component. And making that statement will, hopefully, it will be incremental. And as we have more and more development, we might need to make more and more of those statements with curbside management.
I appreciate that, and my heart goes out to people who are just struggling to make it in North Vancouver, and then, we say, sorry, that space is no longer available to you, it's gonna be $100 a month in your own parkade, and it's just harder for that group, but sometimes good policy is not necessarily good politics in the community. I have Councillors Murray, Councillor Hanson, and Councillor Pope. Councillor Murray.
So, everything the mayor said times 10. It sounds like it's a way to sort of get a handle on the challenges that we're facing. And when I hear what you're saying, I feel sort of optimistic that this is sort of a long-term plan, long-term discussion. It's going to be incremental. But when I hear from Mr. Cohen, who says, we just wanted to come here and check in to see if the team's got it right and we're heading in the right direction, that makes me a little bit nervous because I feel like you're wanting to implement something quickly. Mr. Stewart talks about a year. And, the city of North Vancouver has just implemented paid parking, and they've been building in Lower Lonsdale for 25 years. Like actively building high density in Lower Lonsdale and Lonsdale for like over 2 decades. And they're just putting in the paid parking now. And they have lots of parking issues, like a lot of parking issues. So that density didn't show that people were necessarily getting out of their cars because we've got a lot of car issues. Certainly there's a lot of services that people outside of that sort of central Lonsdale area use. And a lot of us will be changing if there's other options because we don't want to pay we don't want to pay for parking. We just don't even want to go there. I don't want to drive around the block 10 times to try to find a parking spot so I can go to a doctor's appointment. But that's what's happening. So we'll see if the paid parking turns that over because obviously they have an issue with people parking on their streets all day long and then going elsewhere, right? We have that near our park areas. The Deep Cove is a good example in the sense that we implemented a system a couple of years ago, a pay parking system that has been very bumpy, has really not resulted in, reducing the amount of congestion and the lineup of cars coming into the area. It continues to impact the residents negatively. We've got safety issues. But we really haven't pivoted away to trying to address that because we're trying to be everything we can to everybody, and we just can't. We have to admit that we can't. We have to just say the parking lots are for the visitors. The streets are because many of those houses were built on country lanes and country roads. They've got to have some parking. I have a family in Deep Cove that has no parking, no lane, no parking, nothing. And they actually can't go out in the summer. They didn't go out all summer or register their children in any events because if they left, when they came back, they would have to walk a mile to even get home because they have no parking. So I just, and I'm glad you said we're not applying a one-size-fits-all because I feel like sometimes we do that and then it doesn't work. And I think it's really important that we understand the areas when we're implementing this kind of curbside management. If you go down to Maplewood, which is one of those village centers, and you look on Old Dollarton, which is between Riverside and our new fire station, there's maybe 5 houses on that street. There is no parking, 0. It is all filled with local business traffic. They don't have enough parking. And we're going to make it worse because we have just approved 3 developments in that area. And I don't know actually how that area is going to function, even when those developments are built out. We already know, as the mayor's pointed out, we have more cars parking on side streets because they don't want to pay the underground charge. But we also have a lot of businesses. Like Lower Lynn is not the city of North Van. Lower Lynn is a commercial light industrial area that's been turned into a residential area. And we still have an active commercial development area that we, in our community plan, told the community that we would protect. There's auto body shops, mechanic shops. They require curbside parking in order to function. So how do we manage that without pushing them up? Already the residential density around them has raised the value of their land so much, their assessments, their taxation, and it's challenging. So then we turn around and add pay parking to their life, and then you're hurting business. So that it's a super fine balance. I don't see these areas built out yet. I quite frankly don't know if this legislation the province has put in place is going to actually, I don't know what it's going to do. I think it was built on a lot of, hopes that they could solve problems, but I don't know if that's going to be the reality of it. So we'll have to see how that plays out. I just feel like we're kind of early right now. We've made decisions with policy in Bond Street. The mayor's talked about Bond Street too. Bond Street is a parking lot for a care center and to a social housing development, and now 2 massive rental projects. One little tiny street. It's crazy what's going on down there. And then the commercial side of Mountain Highway is being impacted by people parking on that side too. And then those businesses are being impacted. And then people are parking in the Canadian Tire parking lot. And then U-Haul is pouring all their trucks out on Harbor. And then semis are stopping on Main Street to unload their supplies for U-Haul. Like, it is crazy. So I really need to understand from staff, like, this meeting, I think could take 4 hours, we've got 10 more minutes on this item, unless you're gonna stretch it and 3 more speakers. But I just need to understand, like, I don't know if this is the right way to go. I think the long-term vision and start looking and collecting data and start looking at different scenarios and areas very carefully. But I'm not interested at all right now in rushing into paid parking anywhere. We just did that with 3 of our parks just to manage the demand in the summertime. And there was a, trade-off to the residents. They got a pass, so they didn't have to incur those costs. But when Mr. Stewart says, in the next year, like, that makes me really nervous that we're gonna be jumping in, putting paid parking in because we think we're a city when we're really a suburb. And we have other issues, and we have businesses to manage. And we have to also look at those developments because, as the mayor rightfully points out, we began reducing those parking spots in those buildings. Maybe what we really need to do is start increasing the number, because the car is not disappearing. Through all this density, we were convinced if you build density, everybody will walk and ride a bike. And that just is not the case. And so we really need to take a really realistic and very, a view of each of these areas and what would happen if we went in and did some of these things. What's that impact gonna be? What is the cause and reaction, right? That is so important, because we have put some policy in place, and it's created more problems than it's been worth in regards to the impact of residents, businesses, and it's been very challenging politically for us to explain to people, when
Councillor.
they're already frustrated.
Sorry,
Yeah,
Mr. Stewart.
no, I have to take exception to the comment that I made about 1 year.
Oh,
I'm not saying we have to decide this in a year. I'm saying that this is something that we can't escape. And we need to have some real deliberation about it, and whether it's this year or next year, but we need to have some deliberation about it. That's all I'm
yeah,
saying.
let's just keep talking. I'd like to keep talking about this and providing examples and looking at areas and staff showing us maps and how this would work and how you're going to deal with businesses and commercial and retail. They all have different, and accessibility and places for cycling and places for cars. A little tiny mini car on the Parkway from Superstore the other day drove down the bike lane. Little tiny car, and then it got stuck.
Yeah.
Because it didn't really know where to go. So it's a whole bunch of examples that we need to see before we understand how this actually is going to work, and what the impact's gonna be.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's gonna dispute that that's generally the direction you have to go as you become a more densified community. It's the breadth and the speed with
Yeah.
which we're moving that direction that's.
Making us nervous.
Mr. Cole.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to clarify as well, tonight it's really just to introduce the concept of moving beyond just thinking about cars as curbside management and thinking about the curbside space, particularly in our high growth, high demand areas. This is the first conversation of what's going to be met. The next step, assuming that council kind of aligns with, okay, staff, I'm happy for you to go and explore this, is to come up with a framework, which is called the Curbside Management Strategy. And that looks at all these different tools, and really what that's going to create a conversation with council is, what type of tools would you like us to look at what locations generally, and when? So that's kind of what the next iteration is, and that's when we start to go into some of that further discussion in terms of, okay, RPO, resident exempt, or time-limited parking, or different spaces, particularly as we think about our town centres, how important is green infrastructure, accessibility, and all those different pieces that have come up. And then from that piece, we collectively have a framework that helps guide our work, and then we can look at specific sub-regions, just saying, okay, let's talk about Lynn Creek as an example. How do we take these tools, thinking about the framework, and as we apply them to streets, does that make sense for the local context? Is there a little bit of tweaking? And all that's supported by the data collection process as well. So it is a long journey. There'll be many more conversations as we start to delve into this curbside management space. But I just want to really give council some comfort, I guess, that this is not just, we're here to talk about certain things and we're going to go away and start to make some decisions. It's certainly going to be an iterative process from council, and it's going to take us some time to get there.
Yeah, but the problem with that, Peter, is we can't take 3 years to do it.
Yeah.
Okay? I mean, our community is frustrated now, and we need to find ways to move it forward. Anyway, I just have acknowledged Councillor Pope has been waiting very, very patiently for an opportunity to speak. I just want to acknowledge her and go from there.
I've got Councillor Hanson and Councillor Pope, and then we do need to move on to the next item. So, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Tom, Mr. Bracewell, and all the council comments. I appreciated them. I'm going to be brief. First thing I'm going to ask is, we use the phrase curbside management, and I read the report with care, your report, Mr. Bracewell, and Mr. Todd's report, and it seemed to me that we were really talking about parking.
Exactly.
Would it be better if we use the phrase parking or curbside management and parking? Because in the community outreach I did, the phrase curbside management isn't very well understood. And it does seem that really we're talking about our parking policy. So I just put that forward. Next question rising out of the discussion today. So we have a call for Mr. Stewart for very swift action, have to identify a plan quickly. We have other voices around council saying it's incremental and has to evolve. We'll have to be careful about unintended consequences of different policies. But I guess my question to you, Mr. Todd, what are the details of our plan, timeline? Like what do you intend to do next? What are the actual practicalities of it, and when is this curbside management strategy? Do you envision it being completed, and in what components first? What's it going to look like? What's the strategy actually going to look like, or this plan actually going to look like in the coming months when it comes back to us, or years, or decades, or whatever it is, Mr. Taha? Maybe it's a decade-long planning process. I don't know. I don't think we've determined that yet. But if you could speak to that.
Please.
Through the mayor, I think, yeah, to tackle your first question, curbside management is just an industry term because in recognition that it's beyond just parking. There's wheelchair accessibility, there's landscaping, parquets, there's patios, there's other elements that are embedded in that term. But you're right. I think the exact terminology could easily be curbside management and parking strategy. So those sorts of details we can certainly work out as we work with our communication department on how best to move this forward. In terms of details of how we roll this out, I see two things at play. I'm just going to use the city of North Vancouver as an example that rolled out a very comprehensive curb and access plan, which is their parking strategy or their curbside management plan, where they're really looking at like ripping a Band-Aid and doing it all at once, right? And that's one strategy. I'll be honest, that's not my strategy. I think a block-by-block analysis of data-driven 85th percentile, looking at how we can adapt block by block and setting up a policy and a strategy and a framework to help us make decisions. So we're not doing it all at once, but rather tackling specific neighborhoods where we know from data that those neighborhoods could benefit potentially from different parking regulations. So I think two elements at play. One will be the timeline for the strategic transportation plan, which I'll be honest, like is a longer process. It's a 2 to 3 year process to develop policies, to touch base with council multiple times about what those policies look like. But I wouldn't sit on our hands for 2 to 3 years while we're waiting for that. I think we could tackle it block by block and learn from example, right? Trial something, doesn't work, adapt. And so taking that data-driven approach is at least the way that I'd like to see this being rolled out.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Pope?
Thank you very much. And I agree with Councillor Hanson that really curbside management is just a euphemism for parking limits and pay parking. So let's just call a spade in our future communications. Pleased to hear that it's going to be all based on utilization. Am I to infer then that the next step, in addition to determining what are the highest demand areas, will include the data collection from various town centers?
Mr. Taha?
Through the mayor to Councillor Pope, I think that we're not going to do the entire town center all at once. Again, looking at problem areas where anecdotally we know there are issues, and then looking at a certain precinct and maybe taking small steps and identifying certain blocks, and then monitoring the impact of those small changes on the surrounding and the spillover effect of those changes. So I think it's a matter of, with all due honesty, I think there's a little bit of trial and error when it comes to curbside management. That's what most jurisdictions in the Lower Mainland are grappling with. You can't always anticipate the spin-off or spillover impact of a certain decision. So I would use a less is more approach of tackling specific problem areas and adapting as we learn more information.
And when you say small steps, are we talking time limits to start with, that kind of thing?
It could be, that might be, but a lot of neighborhoods, we already have time limits, right? And so looking at those time limits and whether those time limits are already experiencing issues even after the time limits. I'll also hand it over to my Mr. Cohen.
Yeah, just to add to kind of what Ehab's talking about, in many of these areas, we already do this today in terms of what's the existing issue and how do we respond. What the key next step of the priority paper and going into curbside management strategy is, okay, how do we do this consistently in terms of the tools that we have and what tools are available to us so that we can come up with what I've referred to as a framework of the curbside management strategy. So that's kind of the next key piece so that we can actually look at what that toolkit is, which is what the framework is, and then look at those tools based on what the local circumstances.
And what is the timeline for the framework? When will we expect to see that come back to us?
So I can respond to that. The curbside management strategy as a whole, at the very least, has to be part of a chapter of the strategic transportation plan. So at the very worst, it's the next 2 years. We need to finalise it. From staff's perspective, we would like to accelerate that ahead of the completion of the strategic transportation plan, just because we know we already have problem areas. And so assuming that we don't hear otherwise from council, that'd be something that we would take away and find out how do we accelerate our timeline to come up with that strategy ahead of the next couple of years of the strategic transportation plan as well.
Mr.
Okay.
Bracewell, I think you had some additional comments?
Oh.
Yeah, I just want to hopefully be of help. I appreciate the commentary about, is this curbside management, can we call it parking? And I would suggest not. I would suggest you begin embracing the word curbside management. I want to give you two examples. The transition in our industry, like I remember becoming the first manager of active transportation at the city of Vancouver. No one was actually using the word active transportation. We had walking and cycling, and now it's a common term used across municipalities. The other one is when we did the first protected bike lane, cycle track, we didn't know what to call it because it was different than a painted bike lane. So I'm just trying to help you as the transportation professional that was hired to help you. This, like I said, it's an emerging best practice. Other cities are using it. It's starting to become part of our Transportation Association conferences, dedicated sessions on curbside management, and it is trying to represent back your community values beyond parking for those other realms within the curbside that the community values. And again, pick up, drop off as like another example. That's not parking. So I just wanted to say that as a supportive, you do want to work, yes, with your communications. There's a transition happening and it's not going to make sense to a lot of residents and businesses, but the industry is moving in this direction.
I do have some other questions I'd like to get to. Thank you.
Comment from Mr. Stewart, and then I'll come back to you, Mr. Stewart.
I just want to ask a very direct question for Mr. Pope. We're not planning to implement any of this. We're planning to study it, look at it, but we're not planning to implement it necessarily in the next year. Is that a fair comment?
That's a fair comment, unless there's other direction from council. That's our current strategy. Yeah.
Okay, I just, because,
Thank you.
you know, my concern is this will populate political discussion that's going to happen in the next year unnecessarily. And I do not want to, and I'm going to say this to all my staff, I do not want to create political controversy. I want to give council an opportunity to run on whatever they're going to run on, but I don't want to create controversy unnecessarily. So I don't mind doing the work. I think we have to do the work, and I feel it's really responsible to do the work, but that doesn't mean that we create the controversy. So I just want to make that very clear with my engineering staff.
Councillor Pope.
Okay, thank you. I think it's a bit early to talk about election strategy. We got a whole year to serve the public and provide our leadership on key issues until that happens. I know other councillors are actively thinking about it at this point, but I hope that we can put that aside and make the best decisions for our community, not based on what may or may not happen with an election. I wanted to clarify what we're talking about. So when we say growth centers, the town centers, will that include Edgemont? Because we know in Edgemont, we have a big problem with people parking all day. And parking is getting scarcer and scarcer on the street. Underneath, with the free parking for a limited time, it's still available. But I'm curious about that, and I'm curious about whether it could possibly include a scan of light industrial zones as well. And that includes an area south of Marine Drive, surrounding Lloyd Street, where we've had an increase in RVs and all of that, that's putting pressure on parking for businesses there. And I would like to see, you know, that addressed in some way. And I wanted to confirm that we are not talking about within shopping centers. So in Lynn Valley, we're not talking about the Lynn Valley Shopping Center, where there's parking for people who are at the shopping center and staff. but we're talking about parking management on surrounding streets and surrounding neighborhoods there. Same for Parkgate. Is that generally correct?
Mr. Taha, do you have comments about neighborhood specific, or Mr. Cohen, or?
I can provide a quick answer. So the key focus here is on mixed-use neighbourhoods, which is typically closer to our town centres that are going through the process of developing. Absolutely, there's going to be principles that we come out of this strategy that are going to be applicable to our village areas, because they are just, you know, in for want of a better expression, they're a smaller version of our town centres that also experience some of these challenges as well. So there's definitely through this process principles that are going to be applicable in those other high demand areas. Where we have talked about key growth centres, they are our 4 key growth areas, which are our town centres. But again, certainly applicable principles to other areas. And then just a clarification from your query, Councillor Hope, this is all talking about on-street. So your query about parking lots and the likes as well, that is not part of this process. Again, principles could certainly be considered outside of the street, but the primary focus from the transportation team is on-street parking areas.
And that would include, for example, the Delbrook Recreation Center, because that's not actually in a town center.
Yeah, so this is all really focusing on the street. That's really the key goal here on the curbside management. It is on street is where the focus is. But again, principles and the framework that you identify for what to apply on street, they could certainly be considered off street, which would be kind of Delbrook Rec Centre. We consider that to be off street.
But it's on the street when it's right outside the community center and it's on Queens, which we know is happening.
Sure, so Queens Road as an example, we would call that on street. The actual community centre parking lots, we classify that as off street.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. This has been a really good introduction to this topic. I mean, you've obviously heard a lot of comments, the visceral reaction from council on some of these issues. Of course, we get to watch North Van City go through this first and see how it all works out. I would suggest that if you go onto the online topics, looking up the issue of the transition for the city of North Van, they've had some real challenges with the new regulations for the RPO spaces within the city. The process to get a permit for your street has just become incredibly complex. And so I know there's a lot of people expressing concern about that, and they're going to sort that out. So if we ever have policies like that in future, let's do some dry runs and tests before we roll it out to the public. I don't see any further speakers on this matter, and I do think we need to move on to the next item. So I'd like to extend my appreciation to Mr. Bracewell for your presentation. Mr. Taha, thank you very much.
We're gonna practice curbside management, not just parking.
Parking, no.
We shall embrace it.
There you go.
Maybe not.
Cheers.
Good deal.
Okay. And seasonal readiness. Mr. Cole.
Just wait for the slides to come up. Do I need to do that here?
What's mobility for?
Because
That's the last slide.
Oh, that was very well said. Oh, okay.
okay.
That was a splash for some.
Nothing to do with that season. Okay, good evening, Mayor and Council. In the interest of time, I'm just going to really get quickly into here. So there's a number of presenters this evening. You'll hear from myself for the first few slides, just to provide you an overview of the upcoming seasonal outlook, as well as the seasonal preparations and the activities we're doing in the lead up to the fall. I will then hand it over to Fiona Durkol, who is the Senior Project Manager in my Engineering Services team. She was part of the task force as the outcome of the Atmospheric River Review, and will provide an update on the progress on the short-term actions from that. And then finally, I have Simon Van Aels, who is our Manager of Operational Readiness from Nassim, who will be providing you with an update with an update as it relates to elected officials' roles during emergency, just as a little bit of a refresher. And all of this, as I'm sure Council can be aware, is we had quite an eventful fall last year, and this is just a good opportunity to have a discussion with Council just to present the things that we've been working on, as well as some things to be mindful of as we move forward into the fall storm season. This does go, there is a number of slides, so if there is an opportunity to break, we'll try and find it for questions as we go through. So this is just a single slide for you as it relates to the seasonal outlook. We got this from Environment and Climate Change Canada just a few days ago. Obviously, with any seasonal outlooks, it's the best information we have at this time. And as we get closer and closer to the fall, we get more and more regular updates from Environment Canada as it relates to what they're anticipating. As you can see on the screen here, the current observations are that we have above normal sea surface temperature in the North Pacific, and really what that means for Environment Canada's seasonal model is that they haven't yet set a good confidence yet of the upcoming fall season, but what they are indicating that there's potentially a 40 to 50% chance of above normal precipitation, so a wetter fall storm season potentially coming ahead. And a likelihood of above normal temperatures as well. For atmospheric rivers particularly, they're also able to provide some advice that the frequency of atmospheric rivers making landfall this fall is currently anticipated to be near normal. We do have atmospheric rivers most years. We had quite a substantial one last year, but just to really remind folks that atmospheric rivers are a thing that does happen. Unfortunately, it's going to happen more frequently with climate change, but just I wanted to include a bullet point there. We don't have more information than this at this time from Environment and Climate Change Canada, but through Nassim and other avenues, we'll be getting more and more information as we get closer and closer to the fall. Okay, so when we talk about, sorry, those icons are very difficult to read, my apologies. They come out on your print. So when we're talking about annual and seasonal preparedness, this is really a really good example of the work that my colleague Nicolas Chevalier and the Parks team also do as it relates to getting ready every year, year in and year out, for the fall and the winter storm season. There's three aspects that we talk about in the coming months. Wind, so we do experience windstorms. Rainfall, which was obviously a big consideration last year, but then also snow and ice. So we've just collectively pulled all this together just to share with you the seasonal readiness that's coming up. So this is a list here, just of an example, many of that coming from both our Parks and Public Works operations teams. And this is to give you a sense of what do we do annually or in advance of every seasonal preparedness requirement that we do. And this is typically done over the summer and the fall, in the lead up to typically around mid-October when we start to see our wetter time periods come ahead. So things like monitoring weather forecasts, we do some training for staff, obviously as a bit of a refresher, annual pre-storm inspections of our inlets and our ditches, making sure that they're clear, or potentially fixing anything that we've observed from a year-to-year perspective, cleaning our storm and sanitary sewers, inlets and debris basins. We do prepare sandbags, just on the event that we do need to deploy them. We do have our tree crews really preparing for any wind-related issues. So we know that we get strong winds here potentially throughout the fall, and that can create some havoc as it relates to trees falling down and whatever the case may be there. And then we also ensure that we have our standby operators in place should we need to activate them for things like drinking water, drainage and sanitary sewer system requirements. The salt supply has been ordered, drivers have been trained, we have our fleets prepared. And then also both our Parks and our Public Works team respond to snow and ice, and so they do a coordination effort in the lead up to fall. And then lastly, we do start, whether it's social media or other areas, through our communications team, whether it's at DMV or whether it's in the scene, communicating with residents, how do you prepare yourselves and your family for the fall and the season? So for private property owners, I think this was an important slide to include because we obviously do a lot of preparations here at the district, but there's also a number of factors that private property owners can also think about as we start to enter and near the fall and the winter. And so we've broken this down into three categories. On the left-hand side, we call it know the risks, and this is kind of following some advice from Nassim on how to approach this. So know the risks, make a plan, and get prepared. And so on the left-hand side, knowing the risks, all the information that's shown there in terms of the North Shore Disaster and Climate Risk Profile. That talks to the various risk profiles that we have here on the North Shore. That was recently published by Nassim in terms of an updated risk profile for the North Shore. And then that talks more holistically and broadly of what do we anticipate are the key risks here, the North Shore collectively. But then individually, you can look at your specific property and go onto our GeoWeb system, and every single property includes any report that talks about, do you have a wildfire risk? Do you have any slope stability issues that we've identified? So anywhere where there's what we call a DPA, a development preparedness area, there's probably a study attached to that particular property. That's the way we communicate quite frequently out to whether you're an existing or a new property owner in terms of some of those risks that are there. So there is publicly available information to all residents that might have an existing hazard on their property. The second piece here, and the third piece element, on the left-hand side, which is really important and that we've learned potentially from last fall, was individuals just knowing their insurance policy. What is included, what is excluded, and the case may be there. So the middle part here is really just pointing a lot of our residents to the Nassim website. They have a lot of great tools as it relates to how do I make a plan for getting ready. Things to think about in terms of a kit at home, how long do I need to think about it? And so we've included the link here really just in terms of what should you be doing as a family in getting ready for it? Should you need to activate your emergency plans? And on the right-hand side, it's all about getting prepared. We try to find as many times to ask our residents to download a loadable. That is the system that will provide you with kind of those emergency notifications should that arise. And then the district also has a really good website with some videos as it relates to preparing for weather events. And so we've included the link there, but really it's talking about how do you get prepared for snow and ice? What are some things to think about in the lead up to the fall storm season? Clearing drains, inspecting your property, looking at retaining walls that you might have, and things like that as well. The bottom right-hand side is a really key piece that was really an outcome that we observed as a common theme from last year's October atmospheric river. We have a really complex system of stormwater drainage. It's a very complex system that goes through private and public assets. And so where we're talking about private properties, there are some things that we ask residents to do. And really what it relates to is go and have a look around your property. And if you're noticing anything that looks a little bit out of the ordinary, hire a qualified professional if you think something has changed. And then based on that advice, work through in terms of, do you have a retaining wall that's collapsing? Have you made some improvements on your property that the district may not know about that's impacting a stormwater drainage system and the likes as well? This was something that was really identified last year where our crews were identifying that there might be decks or furniture in creek systems, or there might be some other aspects such as access to district culverts, whatever the case may be, were blocked as well. So this is something that you're going to see us asking more and more of our residents, or reminding them that they have their own responsibilities for their assets.
Comment from Mr. Stewart, which might be on that.
Sure.
Yeah, I really support the work that you're doing, Peter. I really want to reinforce the necessity to let people know about their insurance coverage. Most people do not know how underinsured they are at the end of the day, and I will work with communications to get something out. The other thing goes to the right part of your screen. I don't know that we've really reinforced to people their individual responsibilities for their properties.
Yeah.
And so I would be prepared to support some kind of communication to the staff to really say, you know what, you don't understand what your coverage is, you don't understand what your responsibility is, and you really need to understand that, because I don't think most people do. So sorry, again, I'm lecturing,
But not just social media, that has to go out somehow, so people actually know what we're asking them, because if this is how we're doing it, they're not gonna know.
Councillor Forbes.
I just wanted to make a quick comment, and it was along with communication, that all of these links are important, and possibly if the CAO is sending out a community letter in the fall, if we're still doing that, that maybe we could make this up in a more simplistic sheet, but something like that to go out in that community letter.
Yeah, this is great feedback. I've been looking at Caroline as all these comments coming up. Sorry, Carolyn. And yeah, we'll take certainly that feedback from the CEO as well as members of council of how do we get that beyond just this council package and get it more broad. So we can take that away. Okay, with that, I'm going to now pass to Fiona Durkle, who should be online, who can walk you through some progress updates as it relates to the review of the atmospheric over last year.
Good evening. So we've been busy advancing a number of the short-term priorities that were outlined in the October 2024 Atmospheric River Review. Next slide. The next few slides will discuss some of the work under the 4 pillars of emergency management, being mitigation, which is reducing potential impacts, preparedness, being ready to respond, response, coordinating effective emergency response, and recovery, both physical and financial recovery. From a financial perspective, our objective is to have the short-term priorities accommodated within the approved 2025 budget by reprioritizing some work plans, and then the medium and longer-term priorities being considered as part of the future annual financial planning process. Next slide. A number of projects are now complete or will be complete in the next few weeks that will improve water flow paths and protect from future flooding. Generally, these improvements include curbing, swales, bank armoring, and inlet improvements. And I'll get into a couple of examples on the next slide. For example, at Gallant Avenue, this is the outlet of the culvert, and the grate has been removed, which should greatly improve water flow and debris passing through that culvert. At Parkside Creek, similar to several other locations in the district, we've had older bank protection that started to fail. We've removed debris from the channel and reinforced the bank protection to provide protection against erosion. And then at From Road, where Kilmer and Hastings Creek come together, we made some improvements to the water flow path by dropping sidewalks, installing a speed bump, and this work's going to allow water to find its way back into Hastings Creek. Our staff have worked directly with affected residents in this area to discuss how the operational details of how this work will function. It's not a perfect solution, but it will hopefully make some improvements for future flood events here. Next slide.
If I could just interject, these are very expensive projects. These are not small projects. We're doing the right thing for the community, but these are not inexpensive projects, and that's all I really want to say. I mean, sometimes we dismiss these, and the actual financial cost of doing these projects, they need to be done, but they are not insubstantial.
Thank you. Yes, and they all require environmental approvals and a lot of planning, and so the crews and planners have been working hard on these ever since November 2024. Next slide. So on preparedness, preparing for effective emergency response, engineering public works and engineering infrastructure services have been collaborating on a guide for field crews that identify a number of locations across the district that are important to consider when preparing for and responding to a flood event. So these are some of our known potential flooding locations. Once these guides are complete, crews from multiple departments will receive a field orientation, and printed copies will be available in the trucks. So these are site-specific guides to help guide emergency response and include things like where we anticipate water to flow, where we might place temporary flood barricades, what type of equipment would best be suited to clear out the inlets in this location, and so on. Next slide. We're working to ensure that the transition from everyday normal operations to emergency response happens as smoothly and seamlessly as possible. Engineering has been working very closely with Nassim to clarify the role of the Engineering Department Operations Center and the role of the Emergency Operations Center at Nassim. We've established draft emergency response levels that are tied to weather watches and warnings. This means that when a weather warning or a flood warning is issued, it would trigger a risk assessment by our staff, which would consider several factors such as forecasted rainfall intensities, forecasted rainfall total, as well as the antecedent conditions, which is how wet is the ground already from previous rainfall events this season, as well as temperatures. The risk assessment would then determine various preparedness activities, and when combined with actual on-the-ground conditions, result in crews being on call, staging of equipment in key locations, etc. It will likely be a fairly conservative approach for this winter, and then we can refine it over time as we gain more experience with using these triggers. Next slide. On the recovery pillar, a number of infrastructure repair projects are now complete or will be completed in the next few weeks. In some cases, we needed to go through, I already mentioned that, environmental permitting and wait for the fish window to start the work. So that's why they're still wrapping up now. In addition to repair of our public infrastructure, we've been working with the province on cost recovery. The Disaster Financial Assistance Program, which is through the Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness, will reimburse DNV 100% of eligible response costs and 90% of eligible recovery costs from the 2024 atmospheric river. Most costs are eligible for reimbursement most response costs are eligible for reimbursement with the primary exception of regular staff hours and DNV-owned equipment costs. We haven't yet submitted our response cost claim, but we're in the midst of having our recovery cost claim be approved, and we're on track to recover over $700,000 in recovery and repair costs. Additionally, the province DFA team has accepted the Woodlands, Sunshine, and Cascades Ratepayers Association Road Societies as eligible recipients, or eligible applicants, I should say, meaning that they can work directly with the province to recover costs related to their roads. And I think with that, I'm passing it to Simon from Nassim.
Just before I go over to Simon, I've got a comment from Councillor Murray and myself. Councillor Murray.
So thanks, Fiona, and thanks, Peter. So I'm just wondering, and I'm just looking at the flood barriers in advance, flood warning, and then the risk assessment and the time between that forecast and that risk assessment, how long it's going to take. Because there's this anxiety, obviously, about what's going to happen this winter. And given that, you know, I'll use the Cove, but given that the Cove has flooded, you know, 4 or 5 times in the time I've been here, and it's been a significant impact, you know, insurance isn't even discussed anymore because they just can't get it. We need to be able to advance those barriers and that equipment sooner. You know, during the flood last year, we had trucks coming down after it already flooded with sandbags, which was too late. And I know that we're pivoting on that and we're changing that system. But I really think that there needs to be we have to show the community that we've got this, and we might not get it. We might not be able to deal with it again. Mother Nature's wicked, right? But they want to be able to do what they can to protect their properties. And they did. They used tables. We used everything we could find to try to prevent water from going into the structures. I want that kind of thing there well in advance. The community has raised several $1,000s through the Royal Bank to purchase barrier equipment. I have spoken to staff about it, and they want to purchase the equipment. They want it to be there. If we, you know, it can be our equipment, but if we want to use that money for some sort of barrier to be put in place for preventative maintenance and measures. And so I just like to comment on how we're going to be able to address that going forward. the sandbags, my own experience in my own neighborhood on floodplain, we need to have them way in advance so people can do it themselves because we just don't have the manpower to come and do it for them. But we need all of that stuff there in order to access it. And so I worry that because we are putting in we're waiting for the warning and then doing a risk assessment, what happens when that goes sideways because the warning wasn't correct or we got way more water? People want to be able to do what they can to protect themselves. We just need to have stuff there that they can use to help do that rather than tables.
So Fiona, I'll start and feel free to jump in as well. So I think there's a few pieces in responding to that. I've come back to this slide. I think this is a really important aspect. One of the things we're trying to balance as staff is that every time we deploy equipment, it costs us operating money, which puts pressure on the tax rate. And that's a conversation we're going to have this fall. And so what we're trying to do as staff is to how can we make the best decision possible, being mindful that we don't want to do this every single time we see rain in the forecast, but also being nimble enough to be able to respond as soon as we have the best available information to be able to make an action. So this particular slide here that Fiona went over, that's kind of going to be what we prepare for each of these hotspots. And you've spoken about Deep Cove as an example. That would be something that'll be incorporated into this. And then as soon as we see those triggers, of a warning or a watch, whatever the case may be, whether it's flooding or the rainfall, the whole risk assessment piece that we're talking about, it's intended to be nimble and quick.
So what does quick mean?
I'm going to have to defer to Fiona to answer that if she's got more information to share. But as soon as we see a warning pop up, we need to know, are we making action on this one, or have we made the right assessment of saying, like, you know what, this one is going to be okay. Fiona, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Thank you. Through your worship, just my only addition would be that, as we all know, some storms come in with quite a bit of warning. We are being told about them weeks and days, and then it just keeps ramping up. And we know that the ground is already wet and it's looking like it's going to have some ferocity to it. And so staff would be doing those risk assessments all through that process sooner as we're leading up to that. Other storms catch us a bit by surprise. We don't have as much warning for them. And so then we would have to do that risk assessment quite rapidly. But the idea is that we're monitoring the weather very closely over the entire winter season, and especially in a focused way as we're starting to receive weather watches and warnings. So we're specifically tying actions that staff would take towards preparedness at various levels. We're still refining these levels. They've been drafted by at the section manager level, and they now need to be reviewed in detail by managers and others. So we're not quite there yet, but we're getting very close.
Got additional comments from Mr. Stewart?
Fiona, tell us
Yes.
about your background.
Okay. Well, before coming to the district in 2007, I was an avalanche forecaster at Blackcomb Mountain for several years. So I am very familiar with weather forecasting and taking action to protect public safety related to weather forecasts. I then worked in emergency management for several years and was hired at the district in 2007, following the Berkeley landslide, to put in place the mitigation plans developed by our engineering consultants, and worked with our community on the risk tolerance criteria policy and a number of other policies, such as the hazard development permit areas. I was the director of NASIM for a few years as well, and then I moved to the Kootenays, where I've worked in emergency management and managed fire departments and so on here, before coming back to the district remotely for the last couple of years.
So I'm sorry I just say this, because we're in really good shape in terms of the folks we have. And I trust Fiona implicitly, and I know she's doing a great job, and I just want to be very thankful for her.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Cole, do you have, are you supportive of having the ability for staging of flood barriers and sandbags in areas that are precarious? And I completely support the risk assessment and all the work that's being done. I don't have a problem with that at all. It's excellent work. It's just an extra amount of insurance for businesses that have been hit so many times and residents that have been hit so many times. And it's not that, you know, we understand Mother Nature is challenging, but if there was a way to try to divert some of this water other than using what you just have at your disposal, like a table, you know, is there a way that we can, you know, stage that equipment? And if not, the community, I think, is prepared to just do that based on the money that they've raised. To do that, they will just do that. But it would be great if we could assist and we could do it with them.
Councillor Murray, we will do whatever we have to do. I appreciate that you're concerned about that. We haven't done what we have to do. I will instruct staff to make the necessary adjustments so that people are protected. I really strongly believe that, and we have to do that. I understand that.
Okay, so that's yes.
That's a yes.
Hold on, that's a
Thank
council,
you.
that's a
Excellent.
future council discussion, I think, sorry, to be clear, I actually have a lot of discomfort with some of that.
Putting sandbags up?
Yep, absolutely. I think that in overland flooding, that people can protect their properties very easily. It's about where the water gets redirected to.
But that's
And so you
why
have
we're
to have-
asking staff to be part of it.
If I may, I'm just saying that you can't just put out sandbags and leave it to the public to redirect the water. It has to be done by experts. It has to be done with a plan. And I get it, in the moment, throwing tables and doing whatever, I would put all of my eggs in the uphill basket to get the infrastructure to work. It's moving the front end loader into position to scoop and make sure that that grate works. And so I don't know that I'm settled on putting sandbags and stuff out all over the community yet. There may be a few places in infrastructure where it's absolutely predictable water behavior, and maybe that's the best way to address it. I'm going to look to my experts to make those kinds of decisions. But
Your worship, I want to be very clear. I'm not suggesting an ad hoc approach to this.
my friend was trying.
What I'm suggesting is, no, let me finish, is that we understand that there's a frustration that we are not responding, and we should do a better job, period. But that's not suggesting that we're going to be crazy about this, because we can't. That's the fact. You're absolutely right. We have to be very strategic about how we approach this.
So if I could just, I'm sorry, I'm just gonna have to clarify this one, okay? Because I'm not asking for any, group of residents or businesses to just go throw sandbags wherever they think they should throw them based on their experience. We've been talking about this for a while. And so the community needs to know that they're not gonna go through this again. There's an apartment right there at the bottom window. It's been flooded 3 times, up to halfway up that window because of that culvert. 3 times. 3 times. They've had to cut the drywall out of their apartment unit. That's the Barkers. And so they just cannot go through that again. The community would love for engineering to meet with them, to talk to them, and to work with them about how they can be proactive in regards to any level of preparation, such as sandbags, which the district brought down during the atmospheric river last fall. In October, they drove down with trucks and sandbags. And so they do want to work with engineering. Absolutely. How do we do that? How do we do that?
Yeah, just before I give Mr. Conn, I was just going to say, I think there's definitely an unacceptable level of risk in a lot of these places. People have been through too many times. We have to have a better, clearly articulated response to it. And I think there's a lot of creative ideas you can have out there. I mean, I was down in the Cove, as you were, Councillor Murray, when the October 19th flood happened. And I'm sitting and looking at these bollards and rail gates and I'm thinking, why aren't we hooking the table onto that, right? So that it's on something secure, so that it's actually keeping the water in the road channel rather than just off the face of the buildings and stuff. So I think there's lots of room for creative solutions to the recipes, but I'm still gonna put my eggs in the keep the culvert working basket.
I agree, Mike.
Yeah.
I agree. I'm not arguing that point. I'm just saying that, you know, when you've been through it as many times as some of these areas have been through it, you want to do it yourself because it doesn't seem to be working.
Mr. Cole.
Yeah, I think in bringing kind of comments from CAO as well as members of council, I think I kind of want to bring folks back to, we are developing site-specific plans. And I think our recent work on Frome Road was a really good example whereby we came up with the concept of what are some short-term improvements. Let's lower the sidewalk when we get to Hastings Road so we can actually have an overflow, a better overflow. Let's put a speed hump in the road so we can better capture that so we don't have the overflow. And we worked really closely with residents of saying, hey, here are your driveways. You might have some susceptibility. Here might be where you want to protect it if we did have another event like last year. We want to be doing those to site-specific at approximately 14 locations. So as we come to the Cove or elsewhere, that's where we can start to engage with the residents, whether it's adjacent businesses, or just saying, you know, from our assessment of what's going on here, here might be a couple of opportunities, but we are mindful of kind of the mayor's concerns of just saying, we've got to be mindful of the fact that we're not creating a new hazard or a new problem as we go through that. So it is a delicate balance. We, as staff, we've definitely taken direction from the CAO up to now in terms of saying, like, what can we do and what can we do better? And we're just trying to balance all those different considerations.
But those are based on your assessments. So the assessments after a weather report has come in, or that's pre-assessment?
No, I'll separate the two elements. The first one is the site-specific plans are plans that are in place. We don't need a weather warning to happen.
Okay, and so when are those going to be happening for the next storm season? Because it was last October when we had that atmospheric river. We're mid-September right now. So when are we going out to these locations to meet with residents and businesses to talk about what you're preparing?
Staff are working on this right now.
Okay.
We've been very busy this year. This is a piece of the puzzle in terms of what we're working on. And we're just working through these, whether it's through our public works colleagues, whether it's Fiona Durkol, whether it's through our engineering team. So we are trying to tackle these pieces and get them complete before the next storm season.
Okay, so maybe that's what council needs to understand when we're going to be going out to these neighborhoods, because we have people calling us right now saying, what's going on? What's happening? Are we going to go through this again? Is this going to happen again? So if staff could provide us when there's an approximation and sort of what the process is for us to get out to those locations so we can communicate to the residents that are calling us and the businesses, that would be awesome. That's what we need. That's communication, right?
Got Councillor Pope, and just noting the time, we got about 15 minutes left. Councillor Pope, go ahead.
Thank you very much. A couple of things. Oh, first of all, the seasonal preparedness. The term reminds me of putting up Xmas lights and Santa Claus visits. Again, I really think we should be clear on what we're talking about, especially in our communications with residents. And that means it really needs to be called extreme weather preparedness. The mitigations work sounds good. I previously asked if we could get a tour of some of these spots to help me understand what exactly is going on. I'm pleased to hear that 14 hotspots basically have been identified. But as we know, these are very unpredictable extreme weather events. So how accurate is that?
Yeah, so we're talking about weather, like this is a very unpredictable, in its nature, it's very unpredictable. I also do want to remind council and the public that are listening in, the event last year was the biggest event that we've had in the past couple of generations. It was over a 1 in 200 year storm in some locations. It was bigger than 2014, bigger than 2018, bigger than the atmospheric river in 2021 that devastated other areas of British Columbia. So I recognise that it's still fresh in everyone's memories in terms of last year, but the fact that yes, there were some nuisance flooding to properties. I fully understand that, but the fact that we went through that event and we had no fatalities or major injuries is a testament to the last 20 years of investment that we've done in our infrastructure. So as we start going through these very expensive projects, we are seeing that we can capture and facilitate these big storms better. And this is going to become an iterative process as we start working through that program. So I recognise that we can't give certainty to council in terms of how is a storm going to come and how is it going to impact our system. But working through the work that Fiona's leading, as well as our public works and our engineering teams are figuring out how do we best respond to extreme weather and how do we best respond to a changing climate, it's going to be a continuing process that we need to do in the years and, quite frankly, probably the decades ahead as well as we learn more. So I just kind of am sensing some of the questions that are coming through, and I just really want to just remind council how big last year was, but also recognising the investments that this and prior councils have made have really helped us to, we're talking about, you know, property issues, and we're not talking necessarily too much about life safety matters per se. So I just wanted to really remind.
Thank you. I commend all the work that has been done in the last year. I'm very pleased to hear it. I don't think it's fair to say nobody died, so we're doing a good job. The fact that nobody died was a fluke of nature, not necessarily our good preparations. And that's what I worry about for this year and the coming year. And that raises the question of budget. I think we only funded in this budget, which I voted against, $16 million for mitigation. So again, I ask, is that going to be enough to get us through this year to prepare for what may come? And it sounds like it's going to be a wetter year this year, and assure our residents of their safety.
Okay, I think it's been asked and answered, which is that we're spending more now than we've ever spent before, and there's still work to be done.
And my final question is, I like the idea of putting cameras into predictable flooding zones. I think that's a good idea. I'd also like to see increased use of drones upstream, and I wonder if that's under consideration, so we can see what's happening in the forests and giving way of rivers and such way up in the mountains, or at least a little ways up in the mountains before it hits us. And I'm wondering if that can be implemented in this fall's plan.
Yeah, so Councillor Pope, we're treating that as a separate matter away from the short-term actions that we're doing. So we are already looking at what our creek system is. We've been looking at that since 2017. We had a fairly substantial exercise. We want to be refreshing what our creek system is doing, and we are exploring what technology can support us doing that that's now available, such as drones. Councillor, there are a handful of extra slides. So if I may move to those, and I'll let Simon quickly.
Simon, you got 5 slides and 10 minutes.
I can do it, I'm sure.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I just briefly want to talk about the role of elected officials in emergency management. So first thing to understand is the provincial support in response versus the local authority response. The province have 6 so-called PREOCs, Provincial Regional Emergency Operations Centers, across the province. The one for the Lower Mainland is located in Surrey. And then they have a Provincial Emergency Coordination Center located in Victoria. In any emergency that impacts a local authority, we would be working in close partnership with the province to make sure that we have adequate resources, and that information can go out even broader than what we can amplify municipally. And then, of course, also working on reimbursement, both for response and recovery efforts. Within the local authority, the responsibility falls on items such as site management and response, so like what we've just talked about with action, say flooding or anything like that. Activating the Emergency Operations Center located at North Shore Emergency Management Office at the Jerry Brewer Building. Working with neighboring communities and generally handling all of the more practical on-site items. Next slide, please. So when we're looking at the intersection between elected officials and the CAO and the EOC director, this is one way to visually display it. The so-called policy group consists of elected officials. They have certain responsibilities like declaration of powers, like a state of local emergency, determining expenditure limits, like what's the financial risk that the district is willing to assume, policy decisions, and authorize and prioritize resources. And then, of course, serving as spokespeople for the municipality. They would work closely with the CAO or any designate for the CAO, who in turn would also work closely with the EOC director, which could be any senior staff member, or it could be the CAO is typically what you'd see. Yeah, next slide, please. The role of the policy group, they would obtain status and briefings, so they're aware of what's going on and ideally know what's happening before it's made public. As I already mentioned, sets expenditure limits, provides recommendations for any outside support or any resources that they would like to see brought in that may have been offered or could be requested to be made available. State of local emergency is one of the most important aspects, I would say, where the mayor or designate have the ability to sign off on a declaration that gives a whole host of extraordinary powers. Input, so any input for emergency information activities, and then again to be the spokesperson. Next slide, please. A state of local emergency is signed by writing out a formal document that's signed by the mayor or designate, and you can set a list of extraordinary powers you can take as a part of that. Some examples we'll show on the next slide, but they're typically signed and then in place for 7 days and will need to be extended if applicable, and it's possible to extend a state of local emergency as long as is needed to resolve the hazard at hand. But if no extension is done, it's resolved after 7 days or until cancelled. Next slide. So some of the emergency powers under a declaration includes acquiring the use of land from private property or personal property, requiring persons to render assistance that they are qualified to provide, so bringing in private contractors, an example, who may have any equipment or similar. Construction works, prohibiting travel or forcing evacuations by extending or providing evacuation orders, and authorizing entry into any buildings or onto land, borrowing money to pay expenses, procuring and fixing prices, or determining what resources are deemed critical and should be rationed, and causing demolitions if it's deemed to be important for resolving the hazard. So that, in a very short amount of time, was some of the high-level
Good job,
powers
Simon.
that's available to you.
Thank you.
If
Excellent.
ever needed.
To put in our back pocket and hopefully never needed.
Yes.
Thank you, Simon, appreciate it. And actually, before, that was a quick comment. We need to practice these things. So when we had to do the statement of local emergency, it took us a bit to get the first one out because it wasn't something we had done before. When we
had done it
when we
before,
were, well, very, very long time ago, because of COVID, we didn't actually declare a state of local emergency. The province did it on our behalf. And so the last time it was declared was Berkeley in 2005. And so you do have to check in and try these things out from time to time.
But
I've got Mr. Stewart and then Councillor Ma.
Yeah, I'll be really brief, Your Worship. I've declared states of emergency 2 times in different municipalities, and it's actually quite easy to do. We just need to be organized about it. But I just want to assure council that I know how to do that, and it's not a very complex process. You just have to be organized to do it. So,
Yeah, I think in some cases, it's not just a declaration. I mean, we went out and talked to all of the homeowners to deliver it because we were going to be kicking them out of their homes. And so we made the decision that the distribution of the information from the statement of local emergency was done very personally and verified that we got the right people and made sure that those homes were cleared immediately.
But maybe a blanket versus areas should be considered for weather events, because you really have no idea what you're going to be facing in a weather
We
event.
definitely, in the last instance, in part of the report, we had to amend the statement of local emergency to make it more broad. Initially, we made it very specific about the 2,500 block panorama, and then later on, we said basically the outfalls of the Francis and Ossler Creeks. And so it was just, we realized the initial statement of local emergency didn't actually cover the full breadth of area that was impacted.
yeah, I would say that at some point, we're gonna have to consider as to whether or not the declaration of emergency should include the entire municipality.
There you go.
I think that's kind of where we're gonna go with this climate change. But I can't anticipate that completely, but I think that's where we're gonna go.
Yeah, unfortunately, it has to be both, because if you have to specifically evacuate particular properties, you have to be specific there, but also for the ability to unlock resources and take action in the broader community, you've got to be broad. So we just have to have a plan and practice, and we already have more experience than we had before last year. Councillor Moll.
Thank you for this, Simon. In terms of the policy group, my first reaction is I think of the mayor because of his experience in training. And I have some experience with EOC, having been run through that program at BCIT. I was a incident commander for the downtown campus. But if there's a likelihood that we may have to step in, is this something that we should, receive some training as, or is this something that, if Mike's not there, there's someone else, like who's the designated backup if you're not available?
The time-sensitive steps are not that complex. It's about preparing the soul and getting it out and making sure it goes to the right people. I had great guidance all the way along by Nassim and our fire chief. So the more complex is what the CAOs and the incident commanders have to go through, and so they need to receive some specific training. Mr. Stewart?
No, I just want to reemphasize what you said. Trust me, we've got lots of training, got lots of staff, and we'll deal with stuff as it happens. And quite frankly, based on my experience, irrespective of the political necessities in terms of causing declarations of emergency, we will do what we have to do. I'll just tell you that right now, as staff, and I can tell you about different situations that I've had in West Vancouver and in North Vancouver, and you just do what you have to do, and then you worry about all the considerations later. I just want you to assure you as council, we will do what we have to do as staff. I'll just tell you that.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. We're at 7. I do need to go to the other room. Yeah.
Really quick, I think what Councillor Moll was getting at was something I was going to ask. If you're not available and those instructions have to come from an elected official, not staff, who backs you up?
The acting mayor of that time, with the support of the CAO and the fire chief, or the CAO of the municipality that's the incident commander on that.
So we basically do what they tell us, which is fine.
Yeah, and you can ask questions along the way, and if it doesn't
Councillor Ma, that's not fair. We don't do just what you tell us to do.
I think it was a jest, but I need to wrap this meeting up so we can get into the other room.
Thank you.
We completed the business. I'll accept adjournment. Thank you, Councillor Murray.